Welcome to Cleveland Conversations. I'm your host, Ed Horowitz. Cities and homelessness are two words that seem to go together. Cleveland is not a city that's immune from this. But in recent months, this problem seems to have been bubbling to the top in ways that haven't been in a long time. Back in October, as the weather became colder, small encampments of homeless people started to appear with headlines all over local media. In December, 4 homeless men died. But recently in 2024, in January and February, new initiatives are being announced. The Cuyahoga County of Homeless Services has pledged to reduce homelessness in the county by 25% in the next 3 years. Chris Ronayne, the Cuyahoga County executive, has pledged $3.9 million to reduce youth homelessness. And Mayor Justin Bibb recently announced a new initiative called A Home for Every Neighbor with $2 million to reduce homelessness. So what better guest to have today than Chris Knestrick, the executive director of the Northeast Ohio for the Coalition for the Homeless. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So all of a sudden, it seems in the past few months, we're talking about homelessness. You've been involved with this organization for over 7 years. The organization has been around for over 20 years. Homelessness has been a problem in Cleveland for many years. What's changed? Why are we talking about this now? Why has homelessness been increasing? How do we understand what's the changes happening recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good thing, first and foremost. Like, I think, homelessness is a crisis that plagues many cities around our nation, and I think we're also seeing so we're also part of a larger national conversation that's happening around, particularly like how do we solve unsheltered homelessness? So how are we working with specific people that are sleeping outside in encampments? And I really think that kind of the coalescing of these big announcements comes together is really a fruit of labor of many agencies in our community that are really working to address the problem of homelessness in the city of Cleveland.
So it's work that you've been doing over the years, work that your predecessor has been doing over the years that's brought this to the attention of city leaders?
I think so, yeah. And I think that, I think we're learning a lot around the impact of COVID also. And we also learned a lot when COVID happened around really programs that are very successful in solving people's homeless crisis. And I think some of that learning is being put into practice and being implemented today in a way that's really exciting.
So by COVID practice, you're talking about supplemental income that was sent to people, those kind of supplemental checks that were able to help people pay for homes, keep them from being homeless?
Yeah, I think there's the broader like supplemental checks and expanded health care. But really what I'm thinking about is, when there was when COVID happened in our community, there was really an influx of dollars that were directly entered into the homeless system. And so one of the things we did is really decongregated homeless shelters, right? We started implementing hotels, and people had different spaces to sleep. And I think what we saw is that when people had more private quarters, had more attention, personalized attention, that people were really able to solve their homeless crisis much quicker than they were in general larger congregate settings. And so, I think around like in the middle of COVID, there was a time when we kind of calculated and knew that there was around 70 people sleeping outside on the streets. Today that number is around, 270 of folks sleeping on the streets. So the money and the influx of resources really allowed us to be able to implement more innovative programming that taught us that, we need to change how homeless services are delivered, that to really be successful in reducing numbers and ultimately, hopefully, eliminating homelessness in our community.
So talk to me about the innovative programming, because I think when people are thinking, there are homeless people on the streets, they need a home. So is it simply just finding them an apartment or a single room occupancy or something that they can live in, or are you talking about other kinds of programming?
Yeah, there's, I think what we've learned is really there needs to be a whole suite of options for individuals. Not every thing works for everyone, right? And so how are we really meeting the needs of individuals that are on the ground? For example, single room occupancies, SROs are, do work for some people, and they have been successful in reducing, and for folks that maybe that works for. We also have permanent supportive housing in our community, over 800 units that are specifically geared towards working to end chronic homelessness in our community. People that have been homeless for a long time. And so I think innovative programming in this context is, let me give you an example. I think one of the kind of most interesting things that kind of maybe defies many people's stereotypes around why people become homeless or like what people need to end homelessness is that one of the things we did is we just did a simple direct cash transfer program in partnership with Luther Metropolitan Ministries and NEAC, where we just simply gave people $600, right? And said, can you end your homelessness experience with $600 cash? And they said yes, right? And so people got $600 cash, and they utilized that for many different reasons. But I think if you looked at the data from that program, I think it's around 70% of people that utilized that program never experienced homelessness from this day forward. And so programs like that, I think gave us an opportunity to innovate and really offer people different options that typically weren't available, and we found that they oftentimes work, right? And I think there's studies that show that direct cash transfer programs have been wildly successful in any way to solve people's homelessness experience. But I think the stereotypes we have, the idea that, if people get cash, they would spend it on drugs and other things are just not true, and that people are oftentimes resilient enough and know their own solutions in a way that really work.
Right. I know that there are a lot of researchers now are really looking into more about the success of the basic income, kind of those cash money, how it can help people who are struggling in many different ways, including the homeless. And I know that initiative is growing. Of course, there is a lot of pushback on that from people. Tell me where that money came from, where the ministries was able to get that money.
Yeah, I think that money, when we did that program, was CARES Act funding. So it was specifically, pandemic-related money that was available. And the need to decongregate shelter was great, and so we were able to do that. A lot of that money's gone now, right? And I think one of the things that is kind of neat to see, whether it's the money that's being allocated to ending youth homelessness in our community, or the new initiative by the city that's really specifically addressing unsheltered homelessness, that there is money that's filling some of those that are able to be utilized to continue some of these programs.
So it's really this two-pronged approach, right? You have Chris Ronayne as from the executive director of the county. You have Mayor Bibb from the city. They need to work together, right? There's 1,500 people who are homeless in the whole county. That's a lot of people without homes. So is it going to take a while for this money to get into programming? I understand the initiative Home for Every Neighbor. They're looking for, they're requesting vendors who can come and provide different services, taking bibs. Are you part of that? What kind of things could people anticipate that money's going to be used for?
Yeah, I think the Home for Every Neighbor program is really kind of one of the first times we've ever seen a substantial amount of money uniquely prioritized to ending unsheltered homelessness. And this isn't coming out of a vacuum, right? Our work us with the county did a really deep strategic plan, and like, how does our community work to end unsheltered homelessness? And in doing that, we mapped, for folks that are living on the street, what are the most successful pathways to housing, right? And when we look at those pathways, we can kind of see that, like, single room occupancies and SROs or boarding homes is one path for people. Another path is to go into seasonal shelter when it's cold, and then, from seasonal shelter, you're able to get connected to services and then move into housing. Another path is straight from, your tent to permanent housing. That works for some people. And so I think when we're talking about the Home for Every Neighbor, I think it's really exciting that so much of what they're asking for is geared towards innovative housing solutions, because we know that's what people need. And that, that strategic plan, which was both informed by service providers, but also people with lived experience, people that are sleeping outside. Like, can you let us know what we think we should strategically be working with? And that, I think, and I think we hear this over and over, but like homelessness is solvable, right? The solution to homelessness is housing and affordable housing, which, it is, as affordable as Cleveland is, we are, there is an affordable housing crisis, particularly in the current post-COVID context of as rents rising and out-of-state investors.
And it all connects with the problems within Cleveland of, empty lots in different places, housing, the mortgage crisis, houses that were foreclosed on. We have these empty spaces. What can we turn them into? All of this gets tied in with helping the homeless as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also boils down to like our minimum wage, $10.10 an hour, right? A single mother experiencing homelessness that's working a minimum wage job, according to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, would have to work 73 hours a week to afford that apartment, right? And if we look at like our housing stock, we have around 6,000 less units of affordable housing than Columbus, and so we are like,
That's a problem. That's a real problem.
Yeah, it's about affordable housing and like people's ability to access that, and so it is related, and all of this is related in that there's no one. I think we are way past the idea that there's one solution
right.
fits
There's
everyone.
no silver bullet that's going to solve this.
Yeah.
Right. Tell me about, I think for viewers, and I think probably for myself, right, we have sort of an idea in our heads of what a homeless person is, but that's sort of a generic stereotype, right? Homelessness is on a spectrum of varied, right? There's single men, there's single women, and from what I understand, now there's more families with children that are out on the streets, right? So there's a wide variety. Plus, there's issues of mental health. So how do we understand, who this person is or families are? How do we understand that in a way?
Yeah,
it's hard, right?
Yeah, it is hard, and I think when you often do this exercise where we ask people to close their eyes and picture their stereotypical homeless person, and it's oftentimes not a single mother with 2 kids that is fleeing domestic violence, that is trying to get somewhere safe and then is entering into our homeless system, or it's not a young adult that was came out as LGBTQ to their family and wasn't accepted and needed to find a safe place to go. People don't think of that.
Oh, they don't think of those.
Yeah, they don't think of like the majority of homeless people in our community, and the most rising population are people over 65 in our community,
right?
On fixed incomes, and they often think of someone, the panhandler on the street that's asking for money. But I think like nationally, I think some things that are important to look at is like, typically like the majority of people that are experiencing homelessness have jobs. They're working, they're going to work every day, trying to make ends meet and trying to find a place to live. I think when you look at the national data around mental health and addiction, around 34% of people that are experiencing homelessness experience some type, have some type of behavioral health need in that way. But I think oftentimes in the general thing is like the majority of people that are experiencing homelessness are experiencing a mental health crisis. I think that there's a disproportional rate that is doing that, but compared to the general population, but oftentimes I think 34% is lower than what people would expect. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that is most important to understand when we're talking about homelessness is that, if we looked at everything and thought about why people are experiencing homelessness, like clearly you could point to poverty, right? Like lack of income, lack of access. But I think the most overwhelming factor in people experiencing homelessness in our community is whether you are Black. Right, 80% of people experiencing homelessness in the Cuyahoga County identify as Black in our community, and so we really have to point at something else that isn't poverty. And I think what we point at oftentimes is racism, right? Systemic, structural, historic racism that has been embedded into our systems, and in particular our housing system, right? Whether it's through redlining, deed restriction, and contract sales, that have stolen generational wealth out of the Black community and so I think when we're talking about homelessness, we're also talking about systemic and structural issues like racism, like heterosexism and homophobia and transphobia that are really the leading root causes of homelessness. And those problems are much, is really what's at the root cause of why we see such a disparity. I'm thinking about one of the things like why, I'm thinking about like how someone gets housed, right? How does someone get housed? And, specifically around affordable housing. And we did a study entitled "The Never-Ending Sentence." And it's a little dated now. We did it in 2019, but we simply looked at all of the permanent subsidized housing in our community, right? And we looked at what is the application process from which someone gets in there. And one of the things that I think is really kind of alarming is that when we looked at it, we found that over 75% of those places are doing life-back, look-back periods for misdemeanors in people's records.
Really?
And so when we talk about systemic and structural racism, like whose communities are over-policed, who's disproportionately entering the criminal legal system, and then these collateral consequences that are impacting them later in life, is the simple ability to find affordable housing, because your whole life is going to be screened on a criminal background.
I think that's surprising. So I think would be very surprising to a lot of people that is it. So yeah, so that's a problem. So again, multi-pronged approach to solving this. And I think, when people think about what a homeless person is, you're giving us a lot of deeper information to really help us think about it. Tell me about your coalition. You're out on the streets. You're seeing people. I know you've said in some interviews that when you're doing outreach and you're meeting when you're meeting a homeless person on the street, you really get to understand their situation. That's the best way. Now, not all of us can do that or have the time to do that, or maybe people are not interested in doing that. So tell me, how do we understand that? How would you relay that to our viewers to understand what that's really about?
Yeah, I think the Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless, we do. Our direct service is direct street outreach, working with folks that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And I do want to name that it's important that we're using people-centered language, that homelessness is an identity, it's an experience a person has. And so we're meeting with people, and we're, right now out on the street, we have probably 3 vans that are going around meeting with folks. And that process can, a lot of it's about building trust with folks, you might not trust the system anymore, but can you trust us that we can try to help it work for you?
So you develop these personal relationships.
Yeah, and sometimes they take years, and sometimes they take months. But I think of someone that we outreached for, over 5 years on Riverbed Road in our community that, for by and large didn't want any services, and then one day came out and said hey, I'm ready to think about something new for myself. So I think that's kind of the testimony to what we think works, is this really person-centered relationship building accompaniment work, where people know their best solutions for themselves, and how are we walking with them to be able to access those solutions. Also our work is policy work. How are we building policy that is really led and understood by people that have lived that experience? We have a really cool space that we call the Homeless Congress, where folks that are currently experiencing homelessness or have experienced are coming together and talking about their experiences and things they would like to see changed. And that really feeds our agency's kind of policy work. And then most recently, we did a broad community strategic plan. And one of the things we heard is that, really there needs to be a lot of work done in making sure tenants are building power and have a collective voice from which to speak, and really moved us into this idea that how are we working in buildings to really build tenant power and tenant organizing. And I think that's been a really kind of enlightening work and really powerful work, just to see firsthand the housing conditions which people are being asked to live in, and how that's directly related to people's experience of homelessness.
Right. Now, what got you interested in pursuing this in this area? I know you were raised here in Lakewood by a single mom. So what got you into wanting to do this kind of work?
Yeah, I think so much of it comes from just we weren't we didn't have a lot of means when we were growing up. I remember getting going to secondhand stores and getting stuff. I think we lived below the poverty line. But there's this one memory I have of going, and this relates to our work, is in the 80s, my mom was a nurse, and one of the things she, work all day, and then we would go, and she was doing some hospice care for people that were living with HIV and AIDS at that time. And I just remember being a young kid and going with her to meet this young man that was in hospice, and just seeing the compassion and always making space for folks that are marginalized even when you yourself don't have much,
Right.
like, and then really being like, it's about being present with people, right? And how important that is. And so I think, NEAC now, we have a hop-up. We work with folks that are living with HIV and AIDS to get access to emergency shelter that's decongregated in our community. And that's, and so I think, moments like that in my life have really informed this. But I think like the other side of it is like after I did undergraduate, I moved into a house hospitality and lived side by side with people that were, experiencing mental health needs, and and as part of a place called the Catholic Worker, and I lived there, and we offered people just come live with us, and really built really deep relationships with people. And then I ran a drop-in center, in Cleveland that was, and it wasn't, it was more like very personal, kind of like, this is more of how we're going to live our lives. And, I did that for a long time. And I think I just kind of really built like connections into the community and really felt like compelled by their stories and began to understand really the root causes by listening to them.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of really propelled me forward into this work at the Northeast Ohio Coalition.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from you, that you're listening to what other people are saying. You're not just like, here, I'm sitting with folks from the foundation. This is what we decided we want to do for you. I'm listening to what you're doing. You're going to talk to people, outreach, listening to them. I think you're really trying to understand from that root cause.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the only way we can do this work, right? Is really like side by side with people that are living it, and that are directly impacted by it. I think that's one of the most exciting things around like some of the youth work that's happening, is that work has been so much led by young adults that have lived experience, that are really leading the work. Like, how do we solve youth and young adult homelessness in our community? And they're leading it, right? And I think
more bottom up, less top down.
Yeah, and that's I think, and that's somewhat why I think I'm excited really around the initiative. I think the initiative at the city is that it does offer an opportunity to rethink the ways we've always done things.
So what can we do? What you guys are 501c3, people can make donations to you, or do you need more volunteers? All of the above. What's the best thing to do? I asked some of my students before today's broadcast, what do you do? And some of them said, oh, my parents always told me, don't give money to them. That's not, don't give them a few dollars, bring them some food. Should we always carry an extra sandwich with us? Some students are scared to go talk to, people who are unhoused. So what's the best way that we can do it both for you as the coalition and sort of on the individual level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are a coalition, and so I think we're always welcoming financial donations. That's clear. We have to survive, and in some ways, we are the greatest panhandlers, right? Like, we're always asking everyone for money. But I think we do have a volunteer-led outreach program that on every other Friday night, like, folks can come with us with a trained outreach worker and go out and meet folks on the street. It's mostly around giving out humanitarian aid items and like just meeting people and talking to them. And so that's one option. That's on our website. It's called the More Love Project. And people can sign up for that both by helping cook a meal or going out with us. And then I think I always think we live in a society that others people all the time, right?
Sure.
And so I think anything we do to no longer see people as the other, but to see people as part of our community. And so for me, I always invite people to check their biases, right? And be like, is this a bias that's feeding me right now, that why I'm feeling scared, or is it real? And then after that, if you're, to simply say hi to people, talk to them, hear their story. I mean, I do believe that the majority of people are very friendly and nice and want to hear about, what you're doing and what they're doing. So I just ask people to really engage with folks, I personally if I have some money in my pocket, I'll give it to folks. I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money. I do believe people will spend it on what they need and what they, at that moment. And that could be food, that could be, someone wants to drink a beer at the end of the day. I do that often too, and so like that's not my job. I think I want to like freely give, and if I have it in me, and sometimes I don't, right? I don't have
Right.
any cash, and I'm just like, hey, I'm sorry I don't have anything right now, but like, maybe next time I can catch you. And it's really that like being honest with people and authentic, and just simply telling them where you're at.
Sure, and I think talking to them, having something can be good, but I think there is a little bit of that barrier to get over. I think that idea of the otherness is an important one.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting. A lot of people get mad or are concerned about panhandling, and I'm also and they're like, well, they're panhandling, and what can we do about it? And my thing is like the U.S. Constitution gives people the right to ask that. Like if you have a problem with it, take it up with the Constitution,
Right.
not with the individual, right?
Yeah.
And so and that like it's been played out in courts over and over that people have a right to freedom of speech, and that freedom of speech can mean, can you give me a couple dollars?
Sure. Well, Chris, thank you very much for being on Cleveland Conversations today. We really appreciate it, and good luck with these new initiatives and the coalition. And hopefully, a lot of the viewers will be watching this and say, "Yeah, I wanted to donate. I want to get involved." I think that would all be great. I'm Ed Horowitz. Thank you for watching Cleveland Conversations. We'll see you next time.